Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda Evereg's Global Insights team. And Steve, we're back with a bit of a weekly update just around the markets. Also, a little bit of an overview of the Pulse event this week and, of course, Chart of the Week. Yeah, so starting off with EEX Butter Futures. Futures backed off a little overnight. It did the same thing last week, Steve, but recovered quickly. And it's sort of interesting to note, it's that darker blue line there, the firmness into the second quarter of 2025. So this kind of profile, I guess, has pretty much been back with recent trades.
Yeah,
Steve?
I think that firmness is interesting. While there has been a bit of movement around the short term and up and down, Q1 and Q2 prices have shown quite a bit of strength. It's this issue about what's going to change or what can change this. So not much, it seems, quickly. So while we're looking at European milk production in July, we can add that up now. It's pretty much all done. Around 0.5% down, which is not much. There was some strength in France, which offset weakness in some regions. Blue tongue is adding quite a layer to this, and just the uncertainty of how that evolves, I think that's something we'll keep an eye on. We might look at numbers again next week on that. But milk is some time away from being at the trough of production, and I think that's the thing to think about here, that we're a long way from really a supply side change in that. So it's, is the demand side possibly going to change this? So, but the demand is still quite good at €7,000 a tonne. We hear from retail, still got warm weather out there, still pulling quite a bit of cream. And if we think of that seasonality chart that we put up a little while ago, it's had a bit of an update. And because of the size of this black line, the left-hand axis changes a bit and it makes it look less dramatic in history. But it's a while before we see the typical back-off in cream and spot milk prices. So we're weeks away from that before that dip comes. And when you look at milk production, that typically coincides with a fall-off in demand pre-Christmas, but also this little spike in milk at the end of the calendar year, which would add to it. But they're probably the converging events that might change this.
Still a while to wait.
Yeah. So Pulse last night, Joe.
Yeah, some interesting results again, as always. Skim milk powder was up 2.6% compared to the GDT event we had last week, and up 4.9% on the previous Pulse event. So this rally continues, but it's still well below EU and US comparatives, as we can see here. So still the value buy, Steve, in New Zealand. Probably an expectation that more New Zealand milk is coming, and that's what's priced into this discount. But we're not seeing the same interesting changes for whole milk powder, Steve.
Looking across the ditch from us into New Zealand, conditions look to be quite good for the season. So this is like a week-to-week watching brief. Soil moisture is pretty much close to normal, but we've had some pretty good warm weather in September. That's keeping grass growth ahead of trend, and leaves us with soil moisture in pretty good shape. A little wetter on the South Island, and that'll be cooler for longer, so that's going to be a bit of a drag. But look, if we take stock, there's a lot of cheap feed out there. New Zealand's milk price is going to be close to $9 a kilo milk solids, and they've had a small break on interest costs, as we talked about recently. So
much better advance rates too. That's going to be hitting the tin as well in the next couple of months, Steve. So a bit more confidence, you would think.
Yeah, I think so, Joe.
So just looking at what New Zealand, and I guess, one thing is there is a little bit more flexibility perhaps in the product mix in New Zealand these days. And we're seeing some clear efforts to avoid overproduction of skim milk powder, just given that skim milk powder prices have been pretty much sideways in the last couple of months, apart from, recent events. So we're looking at milk protein concentrate trade to the US, and we're just looking at those volumes in the bars, and that line there, Steve, is the ratio of protein embodied in milk protein concentrates compared to skim milk powder. You can just see those exports were up 21% last year and 43% in the 6 months to July. And then they've slowed 10% in July, that month of July. So just starting to see, a bit of a surge in that volume. That's brought the price down relative to skim milk powder, and the trade is slowing as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this sort of travels through 2024, Steve, if it's going to steady a little bit, just with New Zealand managing those volumes. And then the other place for that protein to go is into casein, and we're just seeing casein trade also has picked up from New Zealand. Exports up 36% in the 6 months to July, and so we're almost back to the 2022 annualised tonnage for casein exports out of New Zealand, and caseinates were up 20%. So that's an annualised volume of 33,000 tonnes. So just interesting to see New Zealand very much managing those volumes of skim that are going to hit the market as well over the next little while.
Yeah, especially with more milk coming.
Sure.
Australia's also into the mix in the skim milk powder game. So while we're seeing far less supply out of US and Europe, Australia's increased its exports 66% in the 6 months to July, growing really well into Southeast Asia and the Middle East, and obviously contraction into China, which everybody is feeling. It's also bumped up cheese exports, and there's a bit of stock around in Australia, so there's a bit of clearance going on here. Japan and Southeast Asia are benefiting from that growth.
Yeah, and then just going back, Steve, to the whole milk powder results for Pulse, they steadied, I guess, up a little bit, 0.7% on the GDT last week and down 3.7% on the previous Pulse. And there's a bit of there had been a bit of support in whole milk powder, Steve, but we're really starting to see that the situation on the demand side is probably not changing much from China. We've just got that stocks to use comparison there, gradually lowering stocks, but we're still not back to those pre-COVID levels, and demand is a lot weaker right now than it was a couple of years ago. Milk production is reportedly down 1.7%. Raw milk prices are still falling, so we're still in a situation of oversupply in terms of demand in China. And the other part of this is Latin America, Steve.
Yeah, so Brazil is the big soak for South American whole milk powder production. It has been a very strong market and diverted quite a lot of tonnage out of Uruguay and Argentina in the past 2 years. That's slowing. There's policy in place in Brazil to try and stem that tide. It's politically unacceptable to farmers to have all this product coming in. So with that on the wane, we're also seeing production improve in Argentina and Uruguay after pretty torrid time in recent times. So they're exporting more into contestable markets, and you can see what's at stake here. When you look at the breakup of Uruguay's trade, it's done some fairly impressive tonnages into the neighbourhood, taking it away from those dark bars in North Africa, the other contestable markets. So that might swing back. We might see more in the face of New Zealand exporters into those other regions, which is important for that whole milk powder balance.
Sure.
So bring us home, Joe.
Chart of the week. And we're back to the States. Some interesting US product output that's come out in the last little while for July. You can see in those bars there, manufacturers in the US really avoiding cheddar. And that means very few barrels are winding up in Chicago on the CME. And we're just seeing that really quite pronounced swing to mozzarella. And it's interesting that this is a time with very high EU prices for mozzarella, so it kind of makes sense. But it's going to be supportive of the US cheddar market ahead of that extra capacity coming on stream, that there's not that much hitting the CME right now. And a continuing fall in non-fat dry milk and skim milk powder there also, Steve. You can start to see that, perhaps the Northern Hemisphere lack of availability is finally hitting prices, particularly in those US and EU markets.
Very good. Okay, well, that's all from us this week. Next week, we're back in Melbourne. We've ended our stint at Burleigh Heads, and we'll be coming to you from a slightly cooler place, different setting. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again then.